So I guess I should start with the context because otherwise this will make zero sense. My parents have literally always treated me like I was some kind of massive disappointment. Nothing I ever did was good enough. Ever. My dad is this big shot corporate type who basically wanted me to follow his exact career path, and my mom just echoes whatever bullshit he says. Growing up, I was the kid who got straight A's and still got lectured because Asian kids get A+. I was the kid who won second place in coding competitions and got told, why not first? I could never win with them. And trust me, I tried so hard for so long. When I dropped out of college in my third year to work on my app, a scheduling platform that was actually getting decent traction, they basically disowned me emotionally, moved all my stuff into the basement and started referring to me as the tenant when talking to their friends. They'd literally walk past me in the hallway without acknowledging me. The few times they did talk to me, it was to ask when I was going to stop playing with computers and get a real job. I kept working on my app though, and things were starting to look up. I had secured some angel funding and was close to launching V2.0. I was literally working 18-hour days while living in their basement, paying them rent that was only slightly below market. Their idea, not mine. On my 23rd birthday, they did something completely out of character. They invited me upstairs for dinner, said they wanted to celebrate my birthday properly, and that they had reservations at this super fancy Michelin star restaurant downtown. I was suspicious AF, but also kinda hopeful. Like, maybe they'd finally seen my app's success or something. Stupid me. The restaurant was ridiculously fancy. The kind where they don't even put prices on the menu. Dad was being weirdly nice, encouraging me to order whatever I wanted. They both kept ordering expensive bottles of wine, appetizers, everything. Mom even made this toast about how proud they were. I literally almost cried because it was the first time in years they'd said anything positive. The meal lasted hours. They kept ordering more stuff. Desserts, fancy coffees, after-dinner drinks. I was confused, but going with it. Then both of them got up to use the restroom at the same time, which was weird, but whatever. 10 minutes passed. Then 15. The waiter came by asking if I wanted anything else, and I said, no, just the check. His face got all weird, and he was like, your parents said you'd be taking care of the bill before they left. I literally could not process what he was saying. Left? What do you mean left? I went to the entrance and looked outside. Their car was gone. I ran back to the table and checked my jacket pocket where I'd put my wallet. Empty. They had taken my credit cards and left me with nothing but my phone and keys. I called my dad. He picked up laughing, said this was a lesson in responsibility and that it was time I learned that actions have consequences. He said they'd thrown my credit cards in a trash can outside and that maybe washing dishes for the next 6 months would teach me not to be such a burden on society. I could hear my mom in the background laughing and saying something about how I couldn't even afford McDonald's, let alone a place like this. Then I got a notification. They were posting videos of me panicking at the restaurant to our family WhatsApp group, adding captions like, watch the failure squirm, and time to grow up, loser. The waiter was threatening to call the police. The bill was over $8,000. $8,000. The manager came over and I had to explain that my parents had abandoned me without any way to pay. I showed him the call history and the WhatsApp messages as proof. He was actually decent about it considering. Said this wasn't the first time something like this had happened, WTF, and asked if there was anyone I could call. I tried my one friend who had some money, but he was out of town. The manager said they'd have to report it to the police if I couldn't pay. I was basically having a full panic attack at this point. Then I remembered my emergency fund. I had about $3K in a separate account my parents didn't know about, linked to a card I kept hidden in my apartment for emergencies. I told the manager I could get some money, but not the full amount tonight. After like an hour of back and forth, we reached an agreement. I would pay what I could now, sign a payment agreement for the rest, and leave my laptop as collateral. It was humiliating, but better than jail. When I finally got home at like 1 a.m., I found all my stuff thrown onto the front lawn. They'd changed the locks. There was a note taped to my laptop bag saying, time to make it on your own, failure. Don't come back. I was literally shaking with rage. All those years of emotional abuse, and now this? I loaded everything I could into my crappy car and drove to a cheap motel. Spent the night applying for emergency credit cards and calling everyone I knew for a place to crash. The next day, I checked my bank account. They had somehow gotten access, probably stole my mail with bank statements, and emptied it. Left me with literally $46 to my name. I found out later they'd been telling family members I was on drugs and stealing from them, which was why they had to take drastic measures. For the next few weeks, I was basically homeless, crashing on couches and working from coffee shops. I had to sell my car to pay the restaurant bill and survive. The app launch got delayed. Everything was falling apart. But then something in me just changed. Like all the hurt and fear turned into this cold, focused anger. I realized I was never going to win their approval, and honestly, I didn't want it anymore. What I wanted was to make them regret ever treating me this way. I managed to get a small business loan using my app's early traction as leverage, found a tiny studio apartment I could barely afford, worked 20-hour days to get the app back on track, started networking like crazy. Gradually, things turned around. The app started gaining users. I secured another round of funding. 6 months later, we were profitable enough that I could pay myself a decent salary. A year after that, we were acquired by a bigger tech company for what was, at that point, life-changing money for me. Through all of this, I maintained total silence with my parents and most of my family, who mostly believed their lies about me. I changed my number, moved apartments several times, and basically disappeared from their radar. The only person who knew my situation was my cousin Sarah, who had always been decent to me and who I swore to secrecy. Meanwhile, I was planning, learning about my parents' finances, discovering their weaknesses, finding legal ways to make them feel the same helplessness and humiliation they inflicted on me. It took me almost 2 years to set everything in motion. I created shell companies, made strategic investments, positioned myself perfectly. They had no idea what was coming. And now, 5 years after that night at the restaurant, my phone just blew up with 84 messages from my parents, extended family, and their friends. Messages full of panic, tears, and begging. Because today, they finally realized that the company that bought their mortgage and has been slowly tightening the screws on them for the past 3 years, the one that's about to foreclose on their house and seize their assets, it's mine. And the financial collapse they're experiencing isn't bad luck or market forces. It's me. It's all me. I'm sitting here looking at these messages, and I'm not sure if I should feel satisfaction or just nothing. Part of me wants to respond with, maybe washing dishes for 6 months will teach you not to be such a burden on society. But I'm not done yet. The real revenge is just beginning. I'll update when the next phase hits. I've waited 5 years for this, and I'm going to savor every moment of what happens next. Update 1. For those asking if this is real, yeah, unfortunately it is. And for the people saying I should forgive and forget, lol, no. Just no. So after that night at the restaurant, I was basically starting from zero. Less than zero, actually, since I still owed the restaurant money. I had sold my car, was crashing on couches, and my entire bank account had $46 in it. My credit score was in the toilet because my parents had maxed out some credit cards they'd opened in my name years ago. Found that out when I tried to get an emergency card. The first month was literally the hardest of my life. I bounced between 3 different friends' places, trying not to overstay my welcome anywhere. Had to take the bus everywhere, showered at the gym, used coffee shop Wi-Fi to keep working on my app. I was eating ramen for basically every meal and still barely making it. Then, I got lucky, sort of. This guy I'd met at a coding meetup months earlier remembered me and offered me a spare room in his apartment for stupid cheap. It was literally a closet with a mattress on the floor, but it was stable. And stability was what I needed to think clearly. That's when I started really mapping out what happened. See, what my parents did to me wasn't a one-off cruelty. It was the culmination of years of control and manipulation. Their entire parenting strategy was about making me dependent on them while simultaneously making me feel worthless. Classic narcissist playbook stuff. My dad grew up poor, and when he made it, he developed this weird complex about strength and weakness. Anyone who needed help was weak in his eyes, and he was terrified of having a weak son. So he'd put me down constantly while also sabotaging any attempt at independence. My mom just followed his lead because her own parents were similar. Once I understood their psychology, it was easier to predict what they'd do next. And what they did was predictable AF. They started spreading rumors in our family that I was on drugs, stealing, and mentally unstable. My cousin Sarah called me about 2 months after the restaurant incident to warn me. Sarah was like, "You should know they're telling everyone you threatened them, and that's why they changed the locks. They're saying you stole thousands from them, and they had to cut you off for your own good." She secretly recorded one of these family conversations and sent it to me. Hearing my mom fake cry while my dad talked about how they'd tried everything to help their troubled son made me sick. But I wasn't in a position to fight back. Not yet. I needed to get stable first, so I focused on the app. Worked 18-hour days. Lived on basically nothing. I had this one pair of shoes that was falling apart, and I kept fixing them with duct tape because I couldn't afford new ones. The app started gaining traction slowly. We hit 10,000 users, then 50,000. I was still barely making enough to cover rent and food, but I could see things were changing. I hired 2 other developers I knew who were willing to work for equity instead of salary. About 8 months after the restaurant incident, we got our first real investment offer. It wasn't huge, but it was enough to pay ourselves small salaries and rent actual office space. A tiny room above a laundromat, but still. I moved out of the closet and into a studio apartment that actually had a bathroom. Felt like a king, lol. A year and a half after being abandoned at the restaurant, our user base hit 1 million. We were profitable. I could afford normal things again. And that's when I started thinking seriously about revenge. I hired a private investigator to look into my parents' finances. Totally legal, just gathering public information. What I found was fascinating. They were terrible with money. All that success my dad bragged about? Mostly smoke and mirrors. They had a huge mortgage, massive credit card debt, and were living way beyond their means. They'd also taken out a second mortgage on their house about a year after kicking me out. From what Sarah told me, they'd been telling family it was for home improvements. But the PI discovered they'd actually used it to invest in some friend's business venture that failed spectacularly. So while I was slowly building something real, they were drowning in debt but keeping up appearances. This was my opening. I started a shell company with some of my earnings. Then I reached out to their mortgage lender through a business attorney, expressing interest in purchasing debt packages. It took months of negotiations, but eventually, we acquired several mortgages, including my parents. They had no idea. To them, all that changed was the name on their mortgage statements. The new company, mine, was just a bit more particular about payment dates and terms. I didn't raise their payments or do anything illegal, but I did remove all flexibility. Payment due on the 1st? It better be there at 12:01 a.m., or there were immediately late fees and credit reporting. No more grace periods. No more, oh, we'll waive the fee this one time. I also started buying up their other debt when possible. Credit cards, their car loan, everything I could legally acquire. Each one transferred to one of my companies. Each one suddenly operated with zero flexibility and maximum enforcement of terms. About 2 years after the restaurant incident, I heard through Sarah that they were starting to struggle. My dad had to sell his beloved boat. My mom had to cancel her country club membership. They were fighting constantly about money. Still, they maintained the facade of success to everyone else, posted vacation photos on social media, staying at budget hotels but not mentioning that part, hosted dinner parties they couldn't afford, kept up appearances at all costs. Then, I implemented phase 2. I raised property taxes in their neighborhood by anonymously funding a community improvement initiative. Sounds nice, right? Except it increased their property tax burden by 38% in 1 year. Completely legal, completely devastating to their already strained finances. 3 years after the restaurant, Sarah invited me to a family gathering. My parents would be there, but she promised to run interference. I was curious to see them, so I agreed. Walking into that backyard BBQ was surreal. Nobody recognized me at first. I'd changed, better clothes, better haircut, confidence. When my aunt finally realized who I was, she literally spilled her drink. The whispers spread fast. My parents were across the yard, and I watched as people pointed me out to them. My dad turned white, my mom dropped her plate. I didn't approach them, just mingled with other relatives, answering questions about my life vaguely. When my uncle asked what I was doing these days, I mentioned my app and its recent acquisition. His eyes went wide. My dad stormed over, trying to maintain his composure but clearly rattled. Asked what I was doing there. I just smiled and said Sarah had invited me. And since it was a family event, I thought I'd come say hi. He started whisper yelling about how I had some nerve showing up after what I'd put them through. I laughed. Actually, laughed in his face, and said loud enough for others to hear that it was interesting he'd mentioned putting people through things, given what happened at the restaurant. He tried to grab my arm and I jerked away hard, causing him to stumble. People were watching now. I asked very calmly if he was going to throw my credit cards in the trash again or if he had some new humiliation planned. My mom tried to play peacemaker, coming over all concerned about family drama at a nice event. I looked her dead in the eyes and asked if she still thought I should wash dishes for 6 months to learn not to be a burden. She turned red and started stammering about how I was twisting things. Other family members were confused, looking between us. I could see my parents realizing that their narrative about me was crumbling in real time. Sarah stepped in and backed me up, mentioning she'd seen the videos they'd posted to the family chat. The confrontation ended with my dad practically dragging my mom away, both of them making excuses about needing to leave early. As they left, I noticed something. Their car was older, not the luxury model they'd had before. Another sign their finances were cracking. After they left, several relatives approached me wanting to know what really happened. I showed them the WhatsApp videos my parents had posted of me panicking at the restaurant, showed them the texts. People were shocked. The family narrative began shifting that day. About 6 months after that BBQ, I implemented the final phase of my plan. The company holding their mortgage, my company, began foreclosure proceedings. Not because I particularly wanted their house, but because the fear and uncertainty would break them the same way they tried to break me. The foreclosure notice was delivered during a dinner party they were hosting for my dad's work colleagues. Perfect timing, which I'd arranged with the courier service for an extra fee. Sarah was there and texted me that my mom had a complete meltdown in front of everyone. That was 3 days ago. Tonight, my phone exploded with messages. Seems they finally discovered who actually owns their mortgage, who's been systematically dismantling their financial life for the past 3 years. Someone at the bank slipped up and mentioned the parent company name. One Google search later, and they found my name as founder and CEO. The messages are wild, ranging from threats to tears to bizarre attempts at reconciliation. My dad's messages started with legal threats, then devolved into begging. My mom's are all emotional manipulation. How could you do this to your own parents? And we gave you everything. Relatives I haven't spoken to in years are messaging too, some taking their side, others asking WTF is going on. The family WhatsApp group I was removed from years ago is apparently in complete chaos. I haven't responded to any of them. Not yet. Tomorrow, I'm meeting with my attorney to discuss next steps. I want them to feel the same helplessness and panic I felt that night at the restaurant. The same sense of having everything taken away in an instant. But unlike them, I'll stay within the law. I don't need to break rules to break them. We'll update again after I decide exactly how to respond to their messages. But one thing's for sure. I'm not done yet. Not even close. Update 2. Holy shit, guys, these past few weeks have been wild. Thanks for all the comments and support on my last 2 posts. I'm honestly still processing everything that's happening. So after my parents figured out I was behind the mortgage company, I went totally dark on them. Didn't respond to a single one of those 84 messages. Just let them panic and freak out while I met with my attorney to figure out next steps. My lawyer, cool guy, has this weird collection of vintage cereal boxes in his office, advised me that I was on solid legal ground with everything I'd done. The mortgage acquisition was completely legit, and since my parents had missed 3 payments in the last 6 months, we had grounds to accelerate the foreclosure process. We were discussing options when my phone started blowing up again. This time, it was Sarah texting that my parents were literally driving around to all my old addresses trying to find me. Like, they showed up at my first crappy studio apartment, I moved out 2 years ago, and were harassing the current tenant. Then they went to my old office above the laundromat. The owner called me because they were causing a scene. I told my lawyer about this, and he suggested getting a restraining order, but that felt too IDK defensive. This wasn't about protecting myself from them. This was about making them face consequences. 2 days after they discovered I owned their mortgage, they showed up at my actual current office. No idea how they found the address, probably bullied it out of some distant relative. Our receptionist called me saying there was an older couple making a scene in the lobby. I checked the security feed on my phone and, yep, there they were. My dad was doing that thing where he tries to look important and intimidating, demanding to see me. My mom was doing her fake crying routine. I told the receptionist to have security escort them out and that I wasn't available. She asked if I wanted to call the police, but I said no. As security was literally pushing them toward the door, my dad started yelling about how I was destroying the family and breaking your mother's heart. Rich coming from the guy who filmed me having a panic attack and posted it online for laughs. After they left, I sent a company-wide email explaining that if these people returned, security should not let them in under any circumstances. I didn't go into detail, just said they were estranged family members causing disruption. That night, I got an email from my dad's work account. It was this long, rambling message about how they'd made mistakes, but always loved me and just wanted what was best for me. He claimed the restaurant thing was supposed to be a life lesson that went too far. Classic narcissist non-apology. The email ended with a threat. If I didn't stop the foreclosure, they'd tell everyone about how I was mentally unstable and vindictive. Like, did he seriously think threatening me with more abuse would make me back off? LMAO. I forwarded the email to my lawyer without responding. He said it was actually helpful to our case because it showed acknowledgement that they did what I claimed and contained a clear threat. A week passed. I continued ignoring all contact attempts. Meanwhile, I had my PI find out where my parents did their banking, and through one of my companies, I acquired a significant portion of debt from that bank too. Not their specific accounts, that would be illegal, but enough institutional debt that I could influence some policies. The bank suddenly changed its overdraft rules. My parents, who apparently had been floating on overdrafts for years, got hit with massive fees. Again, completely legal. The bank sent notices about policy changes to all customers. My parents just happened to be particularly affected. Around this time, Sarah told me my parents had started asking family members for loans. This was huge. My dad would rather die than admit financial problems. His whole identity was built on being the successful one. Now he was calling relatives begging for money. Most family members turned them down, especially after what came out at the BBQ. A few gave small amounts but couldn't really help with the kind of money they needed. Then came the community fallout. My parents lived in this upscale neighborhood where status was everything. I found out through Sarah that their cars got repossessed right in the middle of their driveway during a neighborhood association meeting they were hosting at their house. Apparently, my mom tried to play it off as some kind of mistake, while the repo guys were literally loading their Mercedes onto a truck in front of all their neighbors. My dad got in the repo guy's face and threatened him, which only made things worse. Within days, the gossip spread through their social circle. These people were sharks who could smell blood in the water. My parents were suddenly getting excluded from events, cut from committees. The whole social death spiral. 3 weeks after they discovered I owned their mortgage, I got a call from my uncle, Dad's brother. He's always been pretty neutral in family drama. Kinda keeps to himself. He asked if we could meet for coffee because he wanted to understand what was happening. I agreed, curious about his angle. When we met, he looked stressed. He explained that my dad had approached him for a huge loan to save the house. My uncle had always looked up to my dad as the successful one, so he was confused. He'd started digging and found out about the foreclosure, which led him to ask around the family, which led to the truth about the restaurant incident and everything else. He didn't take sides exactly, but he did say something that stuck with me. He told me my dad had always been insecure about his own achievements, that his own father, my grandfather, had been this legendary hardass who never gave him any credit. That my dad had basically spent his life trying to prove something to a man who died, never giving him approval. Didn't excuse what they did to me, but it explained some things. My uncle asked if there was any way to resolve this without completely destroying my parents. I told him I'd think about it, but made no promises. 2 days later, I got an invite to another family event, my cousin's kid's birthday party. Sarah would be there and assured me my parents weren't invited, but I knew they might crash it. I decided to go anyway. The party was awkward AF. Everyone knew about the situation by now, and people kept giving me these weird looks. Half sympathetic, half, holy shit, this guy ruined his parents. I ignored it and just played with the kids. Brought an expensive gift. Tried to be normal. About an hour in, guess who shows up uninvited? Yep, my parents. They looked rough. My dad had clearly lost weight, his clothes hanging off him. My mom's hair was a mess, none of her usual perfect styling. They'd both aged years in just a month. The hosts, my cousin and her husband, were visibly uncomfortable but too polite to kick them out. I considered leaving but decided no. I wasn't going to run away. I stayed on the opposite side of the backyard, ignoring them. My mom kept trying to make eye contact. My dad was talking to anyone who would listen, probably spinning some BS story. Most people were avoiding them, which was interesting to see. Then my dad did something unexpected. He started loudly apologizing to me across the yard, like literally yelling that he was sorry and that he'd do anything to make it right. Everyone at this kid's birthday party stopped and stared. Parents covered their kids' ears. It was a complete shit show. I walked over to him, getting right in his face for the first time in years. I kept my voice very low and controlled, telling him this wasn't the time or place and he needed to leave before I called the police for trespassing and harassment. He tried to grab my arm like at the BBQ, but this time I was ready. I twisted away and shoved him back harder than I meant to. He stumbled and fell into the snack table, sending chips and dip flying everywhere. Kids started crying. My cousin's husband and another uncle rushed over and physically removed my parents, practically dragging them to their car. A beat-up old Honda, very different from their usual luxury vehicles. After they left, I apologized to my cousin, gave her money to replace the food, and helped clean up. The party was basically ruined. I felt bad about that part. The kids didn't deserve to have their day messed up. That night, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. It was my mom calling from a neighbor's phone. Theirs had apparently been shut off for non-payment. She was sobbing about how they were getting eviction papers tomorrow and had nowhere to go. Asked if I would at least talk to them face-to-face before making them homeless. I agreed to meet them at a coffee shop the next day. Not because I felt sorry for them, but because I wanted to see them face-to-face when I laid out exactly what was going to happen next. The meeting was intense. They showed up looking desperate. My dad had this weird, forced humility that was clearly killing him inside. My mom kept trying to touch my hand across the table until I pulled it away. They started with excuses, then moved to apologies, then to begging. Said they'd been taught a lesson and understood now what they'd put me through. My dad actually started crying, which I'd never seen before. I let them talk themselves out. Then very calmly, I laid out exactly how the next month was going to go. The foreclosure would continue. They would receive official eviction papers. Their remaining assets would be seized to cover their debts. They would experience exactly what they tried to inflict on me. Complete erasure of their financial existence. The difference was, I'd built myself back up from nothing at 23. They'd have to do it in their 60s. My mom started crying harder, saying they were too old to start over. My dad switched to anger, then bargaining. Offered to sign the house over to me voluntarily if I'd just give them some kind of allowance to live on. I told them I didn't want their house. I wanted them to understand what it felt like to have everything taken away by someone who was supposed to love you. I wanted them to feel the panic I felt that night at the restaurant when I realized the people who should protect me had set me up for humiliation instead. As I got up to leave, my dad grabbed my wrist hard. His face was red, and he hissed that I'd regret this. That blood is thicker than water, and I couldn't just cut them off forever. I yanked my arm away and told him that was exactly what they did to me, and I was just returning the favor. I walked out feeling IDK, not satisfied exactly. Something darker and more complicated, but certain I was doing what needed to be done. 2 days later, as promised, the eviction notice was delivered. Not just delivered, it was delivered during a neighborhood potluck they were hosting in a desperate attempt to maintain social appearances. The courier walked right up to their front door while all their neighbors watched. I know because Sarah was there and recorded the whole thing, with her face not in frame. My parents are now officially being evicted from their home in 30 days. Their social standing is destroyed. Their financial life is in ruins, just like they tried to do to me. And that brings us to today. My phone has been blowing up again, this time with messages from extended family members I barely know, either condemning me for being so harsh or secretly congratulating me for standing up to them. Sarah says my parents are frantically calling everyone they know for a place to stay, but no one wants to take them in. Partly because of what they did to me, partly because they've apparently been shitty to lots of people over the years. I'm still not done. The final phase of my plan is coming in the next few days. And when it does, they'll finally understand exactly what they did to me that night at the restaurant. Exactly what it means to be abandoned by the people who are supposed to love you. We'll update after the final phase is complete. Final update. Reading your comments helped me stay focused during these past few weeks when things got really intense. The day after my parents received their eviction notice, my uncle, Dad's brother, called me. He sounded tired AF and asked if we could meet for breakfast. I was suspicious, but agreed because he's one of the few family members who's been somewhat reasonable through this whole thing. We met at this diner near my office. He looked rough, like he hadn't slept. He explained that my parents had shown up at his house at 3 a.m. with suitcases, basically trying to move in without asking. His wife refused to let them stay. They've never gotten along, which led to this huge argument in their driveway at 3:30 in the morning. Neighbors came out. It was a whole scene. I wasn't surprised. My parents have always had this entitled attitude where they think rules don't apply to them. My uncle asked what my endgame was here. Did I actually want to make them homeless? Was there any scenario where this ends without them completely destroyed? I told him honestly that I hadn't fully decided. Part of me wanted them to experience exactly what they did to me. Complete abandonment with no safety net. But another part of me recognized that would make me just like them. Then he said something that actually got to me. He mentioned that my grandfather, Dad's dad, had done something similar to my dad when he was young. Some kind of public humiliation that my dad never recovered from. Not excusing what my parents did, but suggesting that these cycles of abuse continue unless someone breaks them. I left that breakfast thinking about my final phase. Originally, I was planning to buy the restaurant where they abandoned me and have them meet me there, where I'd abandon them with the bill just like they did to me. Symmetrical revenge. But after talking with my uncle, I realized that might be too IDK, literal, and it wouldn't actually solve anything. So I came up with something different, something that would give me closure while making sure they fully understood what they'd done. I had my assistant book a private room at an upscale restaurant, different from the one where they abandoned me, and sent my parents a formal invitation for a resolution meeting scheduled for the day before their eviction. I specified that no family members could accompany them, and that this was their only opportunity to change their current trajectory. They responded within minutes, falling over themselves to accept. The desperation was palpable even through text. The night before the meeting, I barely slept, not from anxiety, but from this weird, electric anticipation. 5 years of planning was coming to a head. I kept thinking about that night at the restaurant, how small and helpless I felt, how completely betrayed. I arrived at the restaurant 30 minutes early and set up the private room exactly how I wanted it. The staff had been briefed and paid extremely well to follow my instructions to the letter. My parents showed up 10 minutes early, which was unsurprising. They were desperate. When they walked in, they looked like completely different people from the confident, cruel couple who had abandoned me 5 years ago. My dad's designer clothes had been replaced with off-the-rack basics. My mom's perfect hair was now obviously home-dyed. They'd aged 15 years and 5. I didn't stand to greet them, just gestured for them to sit across from me. My dad immediately launched into this rehearsed-sounding speech about how they'd learned their lesson and understood my pain now. My mom kept trying to reach for my hand across the table, which I kept moving away. I let them talk themselves out, let them beg, plead, apologize, justify. When they finally ran out of words, I pulled out my phone and placed it on the table between us. I pulled up the WhatsApp videos they'd posted of me panicking at the restaurant 5 years ago. The ones where they were laughing at me, calling me pathetic, filming my distress for family entertainment. I played them at full volume, made them watch what they'd done. My mom started crying. My dad looked away. I grabbed his chin and forced him to look at the screen, just like he used to do to me as a kid when he was teaching me a lesson. When the videos finished, I played the voicemail my dad left that night, where he said washing dishes for 6 months would teach me not to be such a burden. Then I played one from my mom where she laughed about throwing my credit cards in the trash. They were both crying now, begging me to stop, saying they understood, they were sorry, they'd do anything to make it right. That's when I laid out exactly what making it right would look like. I slid a folder across the table containing legal documents. I explained that I had created a trust in their names. The trust owned a small condo in a decent but not fancy part of town. It also contained enough money for basic living expenses for approximately 10 years, assuming they were frugal. There were conditions, many conditions. They would never contact me directly again. They would sign legally binding statements admitting what they did to me that night at the restaurant and acknowledging that the stories they told family were lies. They would attend mandatory therapy sessions for at least 1 year. They would perform community service at a homeless shelter for 2 years. Most importantly, they would sign over their house, which I now essentially owned anyway, and all remaining assets to a charity supporting young adults who had been financially abused or abandoned by family. If they violated any condition, the trust would immediately dissolve, and they would lose everything. My dad's face went through this fascinating transformation as I spoke, from relief to confusion to anger to calculation. I could literally see him running the numbers, trying to figure out if there was a way to game this system. My mom just kept nodding and thanking me through tears, probably not even processing the details. My dad asked why I would do this after everything I'd done to destroy them. Why not just finish the job? I told him it wasn't about mercy. It was about breaking the cycle. His father had humiliated him. He had humiliated me, and I was choosing to end it here. But I also made it crystal clear. This wasn't forgiveness. This wasn't reconciliation. This was me being better than them. Nothing more. My dad started arguing about some of the conditions, trying to negotiate better terms. Classic him. Even in complete defeat, I stood up and told him this wasn't a negotiation. They could sign now or leave with nothing. Their choice. My mom grabbed the pen immediately and started signing. My dad hesitated, that familiar stubbornness fighting with his desperation. Finally, with a hand that shook slightly, he signed too. Once the documents were signed, I had the waiter bring the check for our drinks. I paid it without comment. A small but significant departure from their script 5 years ago. As I stood to leave, my mom tried to hug me. I stepped back and told her very clearly that they were never to touch me again. That our relationship was now purely a legal agreement, nothing more. My dad, in one last attempt to salvage his pride, asked if I was happy now, if hurting them had given me what I wanted. I looked him directly in the eyes and told him no. Hurting them hadn't given me anything, but stopping them from hurting anyone else, including themselves, might eventually bring some peace. I walked out without looking back. My lawyer, who had been waiting in the restaurant bar, went in to notarize the documents and give them copies after I left. That was 3 weeks ago. They're moved into the condo now. Sarah drove by and confirmed it. She also told me they've started their community service and seem to be complying with the terms so far. The family is split. Some think I was too harsh. Others think I was too generous. A few have reached out wanting to reconnect now that everything is resolved. I've been selective about who I let back into my life. The house, their house, was sold at auction last week. The proceeds, along with their other assets, went to the charity as agreed. I attended the auction wearing sunglasses and a hat, watching from the back as another family bought the place where I'd experienced so much criticism and pain. As for me, I'm not magically healed or anything. I still have days where the anger comes back so strong it's hard to breathe. Still have nightmares about that night at the restaurant. Still flinch when my phone blows up with notifications. But I did something my parents never could. I stopped the cycle. I got my revenge without becoming them. I found a way to honor my anger without letting it consume me. The trust is structured so I never have to interact with them again. A third-party executor handles everything. They get their monthly stipend as long as they comply with the conditions. They have a roof over their heads and food on the table, more than they were willing to ensure for me. Sometimes I wonder if my grandfather is still alive somewhere, watching this all play out. If he feels any regret for what he started. If he even knows what his son became or what his grandson refused to become. I don't know if this story has a happy ending. It's certainly not a fairy tale, but it's mine. And for the first time in my life, I'm the one who got to write the ending.